any members who continue to be troubled by this aspect of the legislation? No? Okay. So, Ms. Bell, if you've then taken all the necessary notes on that, please proceed. I can't remember where you were, but I do believe that you were still at part 3 or part 2. 4? Part 3? Yeah, part 3. Part 3, clause 5, I believe it is.
All right, so good afternoon. So it is now to decide whether this concludes the concerns related to clause 5. Otherwise, we can move on to clause 6.
That is a fair question. I should ask that. Are there any other concerns with respect to clause 5 before we go to clause 6? It seems as though you can go to clause 6.
Thank you, Chair. So going on to clause 6, which deals with the vending license. So clause 1 basically deals with the form of the license that would be issued pursuant to clause 5.2, and that has to do with those vendors that will be not vending on the park, Esplanade, beach, etc. And that can be formed, the actual form can be found in part 2 of the first schedule. And you see the particulars that will be required from the licensee, namely the name, the gender, date of birth, national identification number.
Could you pause there? You said gender, and in my little note to self, I have the same thing written down, but the thing actually says, the legislation says the sex of the licensee. So too does the schedule. Would it be advisable for us to just replace the word sex with gender? No?
But further to that, can it not be taken out? Sure, because they don't see why you have to, a vendor has to be recognized by sex. Right? They don't see why there's nothing discriminatory about a vendor as far as
no, it isn't about a matter of discrimination, though, Minister. It really is about enabling those people who have to do the necessary
statistics,
data mining and management. Yeah. How many men, how many women, how many of what age group, etc., etc. Those are important pieces of data information that we would want to keep. But why say sex and not gender?
Because, correct, exactly. So I was about to say that, Mr. Chairman. I think sex is a more appropriate use of language.
I'm guided. We won't make an issue of it here. Gender apparently is more of a social construct. But we won't debate it now. We talk about that off the thing.
Chair? So,
yes, please.
Right. So these particulars are also required in relation to the license that will be prepared in relation to the NCC, and that would be in part 4 of the first schedule. So in clause 2, they set out the same particulars. In both instances, the license then would be valid for 1 year, and there will be the payment of the relevant fee, and also just to point out that the license will not be transferable. So now the floor is open for comments. Thank you.
Any comments on clause 6, colleagues? The applications will read virtually in para materia across the different ministries. Yes, Senator.
Yes, quick question, Chair. I know that the government is contemplating a new national ID and a new format of same. I will rely, sir, on your advice here, but is it that this new national ID will capture some biodata on the individual? And if so, can we use that then to maybe capture some of the information needed here for the records? For example, at 616, I see photo of licensee. The new ID will, I would assume, Chair, subject correction, because I don't know, but the new ID will capture this information. The new ID, the new digital ID will have your photo and the other relevant biodata. So looking forward to the future, is it that identification, that digital ID can therefore provide all the relevant information that is needed to be captured here by the licensee?
Senator Holder, I want to caution that we are trained early in our careers at the bar to be mindful of the rule against anticipation. Neither you nor I know for a fact at this point what will happen with regard to that national ID in terms of what data it will actually reflect or not reflect, or indeed when it will reflect. This piece of legislation is obviously going to come about before the national ID is launched. And though I understand where you're going, I think that we will be on our best footing if we just go by what is here and what we are certain about, as opposed to anticipating and then being disappointed, running the risk of being disappointed. Minister Cummins?
Thank you, Chair. I just had a query about the expiry of the license, the dates of expiry. With the Professional Services Act, for example, where you have an annual requirement for re-registration, there is a set date by which registration or re-registration must take place annually. Is it contemplated that the expiration of the licenses and their renewals would take place continuously throughout the year, or is it meant to be in alignment with the Professional Services Act where there is a set date annually?
I will allow the CPC to answer that, but my judgment on it would be that we should so structure it in such a way that we fall naturally into sequence with that 31st of December date that is used by everybody else. CPC?
Okay, so with discussions with the stakeholders, it was supposed to be that it would
Chairman,
be
I'm again begging the CPC.
Okay, sorry, very sorry about that. Right, so the period of time is annually, but it is more in line with the sequences of the other pieces of legislation that touch and concern vending. So the same markets and slaughterhouses, the same NCC, they have the renewal every year, but it's not linked in the same way that the professional registration would have. So it's not that type of timetable. Right, so it's different, but what you're supposed to get from it is that it's supposed to be an annual license. I was going to speak to an issue with the Barbados Identity Management, and the legislation currently reflects the wording that would be used in the Barbados Identity Management Act, which is the National Identification Number. The Identity Management Act is presently the law, and so that is why it has National Identification Number and not a National Registration Number. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
Thank you. I was waiting for you, Chairman, to give me the floor. I would not arrogate the right unto myself.
I beg your pardon. Go ahead.
Chair, just forgive me if I'm thinking a bit out loud here, but the Professional Services Registration Act contains a range of professions that are registered at the timeline that you spoke about earlier, that December 31st. And I think we have to give vendors and vending the recognition that it is due and the treatment of equivalence to every other profession that perhaps we could afford it. If it is that in almost all other professions, on an annual basis, there is a set time for registration, perhaps, in my mind, musing, should there not be the dignity afforded to every other professional, including those who are vending, to have their registration pegged to those of the more established and the more traditional professional sectors? That gives them the equivalence that I think they're merited. I'm just suggesting perhaps that if we have an opportunity to right not just a legislative wrong, but a perception, one associated with perception, where there are those and then there are others, perhaps something as simple as equating the registration times with all the other professions may also go a long way.
As I'd indicated to you, Minister, my gut reaction to this question is exactly that which you're suggesting. I dare say that it would be for this committee to determine that, and probably, rather than try to do that this evening, we probably should just hear a little bit more from some of the other stakeholders, like Marvin itself, as to how strongly they may or may not feel on the matter. But I'm with you on it, personally. Are there any other interventions which are sought at this stage? No? Senator Holder, you looked as though you were... No? Okay.
Just be a post-lunch look, sir.
Fair enough. Now, Clause 7, Deputy Chief, please. I think we can hold the... I was just going to say to you, Deputy Chief, that we could hold the question of Clause 6 to B until when we have had a chance to discuss with the representatives of Barbara. That's the part that speaks to the validity of the annual license, etc. Okay. Clause 7.
Right. Chair, relating to Clause 7, so this imposes an obligation on the Minister of Commerce to keep responsible for commerce to keep and maintain a register of vendors, and it will contain particular certain particulars, so the name, sex, the date of birth, so many of the indicators that would be similar to the license, and any other particulars required by the minister, and it would also have the terms and conditions of the license. As was indicated in the overview, it will be kept in electronic and physical form. The electronic form would be made available on a public website to be established by the ministry responsible for commerce. The physical form would then be available for inspection during the hours of the ministry. And then any information that is collated by the NCC pursuant to the earlier sections, the earlier clauses 5.3 and 6.2 will be shared with the minister for the purpose of assisting in the keeping and maintaining of the register. So just leaving it open for comments now.
Thank you. Colleagues? Any issues with the register? It will be in electronic and physical form, and again, the electronic form facilitates the ease of not only interface but business facilitation. Okay, I sense that there are none on this point, CPC. Let's go to number 8, please.
Clause 8 deals with, Clause 8 deals with revocation, suspension, or varying of a license. So the minister responsible for commerce would then be responsible for the giving the notice of such under Clause 9, where they're satisfied that there's misleading or false or information on the application, or where there's a failure to comply with a condition of the license or a provision of this act or regulations. So that is in relation to those vending zones that are not parks, esplanades, etc. For those that are, the NCC then would have that power to revoke. And then I would just link it to 9, which speaks about the notice and the fact that the notice requires that there would be in writing, and also that there would be a period of 14 days in relation to giving potential licensees the right to object. So that will be in under both regimes. So that is clauses 8 and 9 respectively.
Fine. Thank you. Floor is open, colleagues. This is really the first of that which will come to represent a body of rights given to vendors. The power to, not the power, the duty on the part of the minister to give notice to vendors.
Mr. Chairman,
You have the floor.
thank you very much. At section 9(1)(b) and 9(2)(b), my query through you to the CPC is relative to the 14 days after the date of receipt of the notice. Is it the standard that we refer to the date after receipt of notice or after giving of notice? Is it that we are suggesting that the recipient will acknowledge receipt of same, and where we put in the burden of proof? I would wish, sir, to invite comment and maybe suggest that we consider changing this, because I can easily say I received it 6 months from the time you sent it. Is it registered mail?
So you would prefer to say 14 days after the date of notice?
Instead of receipt of notice.
Only problem there, though, is that I may date a letter 1st of October, but it may not leave my office until Friday.
If you send it by registered mail, there must be a way, as you would often say, Chair, to find the balance.
Now I understand where you're going. Deputy Chief, are there any views you have on this? This is not the first time we've done this in legislation.
Chair, you can always try to change the wording, because at the end of the day, it is supposed to facilitate the vendor having the opportunity to, with the regulator, an objection to the notice. So it is whatever would serve their interests in the circumstances. So I'm open.
So would you therefore recommend that you be given until when next we meet again to come up with a form of language that would adequately answer Senator Holder's concern?
Yes, that would be preferable. Thank you.
You're welcome. Senator Holder, you treat to it that way.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other concerns?
Mr. Chair, if you if you object to a decision made by, if the licensee object to the decision that was made, the licensee object back to the same body or the same individual who already indicated that they're not approving the application?
No, honorable member. We will come to that point at part 8 under appeals, whereby a person who is aggrieved by a decision of a minister will be entitled to go to the appellate tribunal, which is called the National Vending Appeals Tribunal.
Okay, great.
So that is what is happening here is that it's the first level of redress. It's to give the functionary the capacity to make a decision that could be in favor of, rather than resorting then to the tribunal right away. So, and it's beginning to be it is beginning to be a trend in relation to making provision for redress. So, thank you.
Any other requests for the floor at this juncture? No? Okay. Deputy Chief, clause.
Yes, so Chair, we now go through to the regime that provides for occasional vending. And that will be in clauses 10 and 11. They basically have mirroring provisions except for who would be the regulator, but I just want to draw the attention of the meeting to the definition of occasional vending. So in clause 2, occasional vending means the offering for sale of merchandise or the rendering of services for the duration of a fair, farmers market, festival, carnival, or a cultural, entrepreneurial, religious, or recreational event only. So that the permit, now in the context of clauses 10 and 11, in clause 10, the person who is engaging in occasional vending in a place that is not a beach or esplanade, etc., they will be applying for a permit to operate, and it will be for the duration of the particular event. You will also observe that there is a different redress mechanisms for the permit because of the abbreviated time. Then they will get to apply to a judge in chambers. That way that it will be a fast tracking of a decision so that they can have their matter redressed. And that applies in 11 as well. But 11, of course, deals with the vending on a beach or esplanade or in a park or garden or park, and though the application for the permit would then be for the NCC. So it's just for the committee to give their comments in relation to the two sections. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any comments on occasional vending, whether on a beach, esplanade, garden or park or otherwise? Senator Cummins, is that a no, a yes? Your hand went up and then it went back down.
Chair, it's
You're not sure?
yeah, I'm not sure. Specifically, when we're talking about occasional vending on a beach, I think that's one of the things that, from a tourism perspective, we are very interested in, and we would want to ensure that this is something that is not just regulated, but it is actively encouraged. But there are a few things, perhaps, that we would want to raise, and I think one of them is raised in the note which we sent through last night, specifically relating to, but I don't think this needs to be in the actual legislation, but it would be part of the policy and the developmental component. It would perhaps be in the training of persons who are working on beaches and interacting really in tourism-related spaces. Teaching, speaking to issues, including problematic issues that could have implications for our brand globally, like sexual harassment. Those are things which are reported on very frequently on our beaches, and we know get a high profile when reported internationally, whether it's locals or otherwise. So I'm just wondering if perhaps there could be advice, not from a legal perspective, on where we could provide persons working in these spaces with the additional resources and training that would be needed to avoid having any challenges. And perhaps it may be guided by your ministry, Chair.
I think that this may be an area, if I could suggest, that might cry out for some collaboration between the sector and the product division of the BTMI. I know that in other areas there has been that type of collaboration, and I would want to suggest that we could probably between ourselves try to facilitate that.
Chair?
Yes,
Just
CPC.
to comment that the National Vending Committee has the capacity perhaps to provide at least a forum for discussion. But the thing is that tourism, I'm not seeing tourism as one of the persons seated. So one of the recommendations may be that you have a representative from tourism sitting on this committee to provide the relevant advice, and that kind of engagement can be facilitated there. Thank you.
No problem. We can deal with that when we come to that point. I think, though, that Minister Cummins was primarily focusing on training, and that is something that we can set up outside of the four corners of the legislation. Agreed? Deputy Chief, ball's in your court again. Part 4, vending zones.
Chair, with clause 12, it speaks to what would be understood as a vending zone. So you see the listing: the beach esplanade, fishing landing site, garden park, public market. The two paragraphs that give scope for wider discussion are G and H. So G and H, G speaks to areas more particularly described in Part 2 of the 4th schedule. And as Minister Cummins would have observed earlier, they seemed very restrictive. But a part of the reason why was that they spoke to existing zones. So when you go back and you look at the fact that it lists the parks and esplanades, and then there's another part that deals with certain areas that are primarily like streets and sidewalks, and that is because it comes from the Markets and Slaughterhouses Act, where certain areas, or the regulations rather, where certain areas were identified in those pieces of legislation. And what happened was that you wanted to preserve the fact that vending was permitted on those streets. So therefore we sought to put it into the schedule so that it would be preserved, right? And then the last part would be dealing with the fish landing sites, right? The H deals with the zones to be designated by the Minister on consultation with the National Vending Committee, and then this power is then spoken to in clause 13. And just to remind the committee that the parts of the schedules or the schedules may be amended by order. So clause 12, open for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir,
Leader of the Opposition, you have the floor.
there's a question as to, is Queen's Park omitted from here because it is captured in the vending zone areas outlined below, Part 2.
Guide me, please.
Fourth schedule.
You are in the fourth schedule, and you're not seeing Queen's Park. Your question is, why is it omitted? Does-
Chair? Yeah, so I think what may have happened is these listings actually come from the NCC. Right. So the thing is that Queen's Park can be included, but that's where what this listing is being informed by. Thank you.
And further, Mr. Chair, the Ford Prescott Gardens is not included here either.
I beg your pardon?
The Ford Prescott Gardens,
The Ford Prescott
the
Gardens.
Prescott Ford
The
Gardens.
Prescott Ford Gardens. And where might they be, please, Honorable Leader of the
Waterford,
Opposition?
bottom of Belgravia and Stadium Road.
I see.
Being
I-
a little bit mischievous, but the Botanical Garden.
I think that, again, the doctrine of anticipation, against anticipation, raises its head. We will not go there until such gardens have been properly commissioned. Not commissioned as yet, no. I think there's still work going on there. It's a work in progress. Yeah. There's still a work in progress, Honorable Member. And I don't know that to the extent that there's a National Botanical Garden in existence, it has certainly not been named as the Honorable Member suggests.
It's not named as I suggested, but
Parliament is a place of precision, Honorable Member.
it's not been commissioned, you say? We haven't provided money in this Parliament for the Botanical Gardens under the name of Botanical Gardens.
It is work being done on the Botanical Gardens, sir. It is not yet a completed project. So yes, money has been voted for work
For Botanical Gardens.
for developmental work on the Botanical Garden.
If I beg your pardon, for the Botanical Gardens, not developmental work on the Botanical Gardens.
In the context of the vending
Press on,
zones,
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to waste your time. I'm just giving Mr. Prescott a little bit of pressure here.
okay. So, Minister Cummins,
Chair, I do have a query. It's in part 2 of the schedule. It speaks to the description of the vending zones, and it has a range of them there, and then you have the fish landing sites. And this is the fourth schedule, CPC. And then the section 12H of the legislation, which gives the minister the authority to designate a zone in consultation with the National Committee. So the lady who is in superlative in St. George, who has a roadside facility, or in Lower Estate and so on, is it that the committee along with the ministry will then undertake an audit of where people are located outside of the designated spaces listed in the fourth schedule, and then designate those things that have been established almost as laybys as vending zones? Is that what the process is at this stage, Chair?
I
So that
think-
those persons are incorporated?
I think that it can be done that way. There are perhaps a number of ways, as you indicate. There could be an audit done. Equally, I believe there are recommendations which have already been made, some from your ministry, as to how vending zones could be expanded. And as I had indicated already, I propose upon this matter, if this matter passes Parliament, I would wish then to write to every member of Parliament to secure from them recommendations with respect to their constituencies. I think that once we accept, and I hope we do, that there is going to be a broad and facilitative approach to the creation of zones for people to vend in Barbados, then every effort must be made from whatever angle in order to expand the zones. At least that's my position. Are there any other interventions sought at this stage? If not, Deputy Chief, the floor is yours.
Right, so clause 13, empowers the minister on consultation with the National Vending Committee to, by order, designate a vending zone for the purposes of this act. So it is a very wide clause to give enough flexibility for
For the
whatever
minister to,
zone
for the
he has
minister to
make.
take on board advice from all sources, act on his own initiative, consult with the vending committee, and expand these zones. Yes?
Well, not acting on his own initiative, but on consultation with
Yes.
the vending committee. So that I have to just stick a pin there. I don't know whether there are comments in this, but I will open the floor to them.
Colleagues, nothing from 13? Okay.
Okay, onward to clause 14. So this clause makes provision for the understanding that the National Conservation Commission will be responsible for the management and operation of the vending zone. The vending zones that are beaches, esplanades, gardens, or parks. And if a vendor seeks to operate on those particular zones, they will be required to be in compliance with the National Conservation Commission Act, Cap 393. Any comments?
There seem to be none. You may proceed. Clause
In-
15.
In relation to clause 15, speaking to different zones now. Clause 15.1 speaks to the manager of markets as being responsible for the public market that is not a fish market. Areas that are more particularly described in part 2 of clause of the 4th schedule, so that connects back to clause 12G, and then the zones to be designated by the minister. In clause 15.2, the senior manager of markets will be responsible for the management and operation of a public market that is a fish market. And in clause 15.3, there is provision for the minister responsible for fisheries to be responsible for the management and operation of fish landing sites. Now, fish landing site, as referred to in section clause 2, is defined by relating back to the 4th schedule, and the fish landing sites are listed. And then in clause 15.4, it tries to make clear that the vendor who is seeking to operate a public market, he will do so in compliance with the Markets and Slaughterhouses Act and the relevant regulations.
Oh, yeah. You may have to call. Minister Cummins, you may have to call, because I think the WhatsApp system is not functioning. Colleagues, are there any requests for the floor at this stage with respect to clause 15? I sense that there are none. You may proceed, Deputy Chief.
Clause 16 is a prohibition clause that indicates that a person who vends outside of the vending zone, that they will be subject to an admin penalty. Any objections? Thanks.
Okay. No objections are taken to clause 16. So there we go to part 5, rights and obligations of vendors. This is perhaps one of the most pithy aspects of the bill. Clause 17, you may begin, Deputy Chief.
This
Pause.
one.
Please. Sorry.
I not only provision, this word vending, this is language now. This word vending seems to be as poisonous to the psyche as imbeciles and disabled people and squatters and so on. It is worrying me, and I feel that we're coming up with a new vision on how we believe we should move forward. In the transition period, you don't believe that we can upset vending as micro businesses? You don't believe that?
Vending is a micro business.
Yeah.
All micro business is not vending. That's the challenge that you may have.
I am fully aware of that. But I believe that we could give some dignity to vendors. But let the vendor understand he's a businessman too. You know? This word here, I just putting it out. I would hope that in the future, people who shape the legislation will take things like that into consideration. Because whenever you think about a vendor, you seem to hold a bad perception. So right away things come into the minds of officers and policymakers and everything. I go investigate this man. He likely to be get involved in video larceny. And he had a record before. Now tell me, even a man in Barbados who had a record before can't find no work in Barbados, and the last resort is vending. But then, and this was in my head before we come to this point, but then an officer has to investigate and say that this man is likely to be a thief. And I'm just saying these things because I think that as I said, sir, I listened to you during your presentation, and although you didn't touch on all these aspects, I believe that you were on point, because we're trying to create a humanism that is not part of a continuum of where we were when black people, working class people, could not get involved in vending. Even though they provide the foods that were available on the provisional lands, they could not sell it without the authorization of a criminal. A criminal was telling you you can sell it. And if he didn't tell you that, you would be charged for a crime. And I believe that what we witness all the time is vendors always carry a stigma that forms an umbrella over the character of the vendor itself. And I remember in here when we were talking about in Parliament, when we were talking about vending, there was a distorted perception that a vendor is, if a man is a vendor, he's likely to get involved in petty larceny. And the word vendor was used even in advance to even say that the man is a criminal. You know, so I'm just saying that I would like to see in the future, and I'm just suggesting to the people that is drafting, I don't expect you to change all of these things that we're looking at now, but look to see if you could help me and others that are not as wise as you are to be able to justify why we can make a change like that. And let us just start off seeing these people as business people and don't be subject to all these investigations even before getting a license. That's my concern. Or unless they want the country to provide work for attorneys at law.
Honorable member, sorry, I view what you said with a heavy dose of sobriety, and I know that it drew a few chuckles. But the fact of the matter is, that from as far back as perhaps 1680, every aspect of regulation of this business of vending was governed by the heavy hand of the criminal law. That is an inescapable historical reality. It is perhaps the only aspect of Barbados's commercial endeavor that still can be traced directly to the slave economy construct, where you penalized people criminally for the enterprise, professions, tradesmen, people who operate in a nursing home, people who are security guards, you name it, all of them are governed by a civil regulatory construct. And the consequences of this are seen in the difficulty of a vendor getting a reference letter, character reference, because of some collision he or she may have had with a police officer while he is in the course of the conduct of his business. It has a consequential effect for those people who may want to travel, get a visa, etc. You want to go into a different form of employment or go into a different form of occupation rather than going to employment. You can't get a job letter. All of those are realities. So I take the point you're making. I am not sure that we can do an adjustment to the title of the legislation or to the name given to the occupation. Mr. Cumberbatch, you're a policy advisor. Please help if you can.
I think what Mr. Prescott is speaking to here is part of the whole legacy of vending. And I would want to quote Professor Beckles, quoting the policy, who reminded us as early as the 1600s. He says that the history and practice painted vendors as a problem and the first resistors to social policy that sought to exclude the black population from meaningful commerce. Then he went on to say that vending was seen as the mother of all black economic enfranchisement in Barbados, and its resilience epitomizes the spirit of the black man's struggle for self-determination and nationhood. And then Ambassador David Commichon, speaking to the works of Hilary Beckles, Professor Beckles, noted that as a result of its history, vending seemed to have inherited a legacy of stigmatization. So whenever we hear vending, and I'm not surprised that it comes up in this discussion, we ourselves seem to see vending as something negative. But vending was always something that was positive, and it was on the backs of the vendors that we are here today and can make the type of contributions that we can make today. So we must not be afraid of the term vending, because it is the enslavers that painted vending in that light. But it was always something positive to help persons in terms of the upward social mobility from way back in the 1600s. So let us embrace it. And if we speak to the president of Barbin, the president of Barbin is always proud to be associated with vendors.
It is really about entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I quite agree with that. But when vending is attached to people at the lower scale, it has the admission by Beckles and supported by what Commissar is saying, tells you that a stigma affects a group, a race of people in a meaningful way. So it is very difficult for you to tell me that a matter that emerged in a negative light from the 17th century, and now the men of wisdom who was fortunate to be exposed to education, still wrestling with it. Not if you're buying a piece of land and a man selling your land, you don't even study he as a vendor, you know? But when it comes to people selling the provisions and the fruit, there's a view. Before you start the discussion, there's a view, a construct of this man being a, I don't want to use the term because I know that when you try to deal with issues of this kind, people that are educated in a specific way can come to the conclusion that you're saying that vendors is not worthy of becoming businessmen. But I'm saying let us, at some point, use the same terms in commerce, in business, that we use for man who's selling gold chains in town, or people who's selling clothing in town, and probably the worth of the materials available is less than what the vendor is selling, right? This supermarket has got a whole long shelf and freezers and everything full of the same merchandise, but the man that owns the supermarket is a businessman, an entrepreneur, he involved in commerce. A vendor, I still feel that. I'm not saying we would change it here now, but I believe that is a matter, sir, that as you look at it, a matter that we should put on the table as we seek to modernize the acts of Parliament. Because we have to change some things, and I just want to put it on the table. I'm not suggesting that what is done here was absolutely wrong, but I'm just saying it is something that we should consider.
Mr. Chair, I think we should note as well that within the ministry, we tend to refer to the vending community as vending entrepreneurs, because in truth and in fact, they are entrepreneurs. And that's how we seek to position them as well.
Honorable member, as I said, I take with a certain measure of sobriety those things that you have said. I am inclined to reflect on the terminology. It may be an interesting thing if we were here debating the Itinerant Tradesmen's Act, the Itinerant Tradesmen's Bill. We perhaps may wish to look at whether or not we wish to change the term vending in the bill itself. And that is not outside of the scope of this committee's remit, as I understand it. What we do have to do, however, is to pause. And while we pause, we can reflect on the merits of what the Honourable Member for St. Michael East has said. The reason why we have to pause is because we've come to 3:15. And that was the time set for the suspension this evening. Added to that is the danger of going much further, because there are some members of the committee who've already had to leave to go to a meeting with the Prime Minister. And I believe there are still, there's at least one other who must leave us shortly in that regard. What I would want to do, colleagues, is to propose that we reconvene on Friday morning. I am open to doing so at as early an hour as 9, but I am told that that might place a stretch on some honorable members, and that the preference would be 10. And as I look around, I am sensing that 10 is in fact the preference. So if we can begin at 10, I can make arrangements with the clerk of the House to have lunch again, and we could aim at going on until Friday afternoon at this time. That is the mind of the chair. Is it so agreed? I'm not hearing any dissenting voice, so I use my discretion to say yes. It's agreed. So we will suspend at this point, and we will then reconvene. And then we reconvene on Friday morning at 10 a.m. Ms. Bell, at that point, you will be able to go through from part 5, please, until part. Sorry? Yeah, we suspend and continue. And my ambition, Ms. Bell, because I don't know that the schedules are sufficiently taxing as to delay us, so my ambition would be that we go from part 5 through to the end of the bill on Friday, with a view on Monday morning at 10 o'clock to, I gave the leader of the opposition an undertaking that this committee would work. And therefore, Monday morning, that's where my mind is at. We will have the beginning of evidence from the Barbados, Barvin, the Association of, yes, entrepreneurs. So please begin the process of reaching out to them. Okay, colleagues? I would ask that everybody stay safe. You have an idea of where it is that we want to go and how fast we want to get there. I'm obliged. So we suspend until Friday morning at 10 o'clock. No.